Hi everyone, Dr. Ramani here. A little bit more of the am I the asshole here. I bet you sometimes wonder if I'm asking you that about myself. Please don't answer that in the comments. Actually, I'm more thin-skinned than you would imagine, so don't answer it. Well, again, again, this is a YouTube channel on narcissism, and these am I the assholes actually may not always get at narcissism, but they definitely get at antagonism, and a lot of the patterns we see in narcissistic relationships, and we get to sort of see them in people's real stories. So this one's an interesting one, a little bit more subtle than some of the other ones we've talked about because it gets at a couple of themes. But am I the asshole for telling my friend her parents bought her house for her, not her? So this is an interesting one because at first I'm like, well, depends. So the backstory: the woman writing the letter is a 28-year-old woman, has a friend, also a 28-year-old woman, who purchased a house late last year. It's an awesome 2-story townhouse, and I've been over there plenty of times to help out with the moving, the decorating, and for hanging out. As mentioned in the title, her parents purchased the house for her and her partner. I truly have no issue with this, as the housing market is terrible for buyers, so more power to them for being homeowners. I recently, unfortunately, inherited my parents' house, which is a 3-bedroom out in the sticks. And when she said unfortunately inherited, I obviously read between the lines and her because her parents passed. And at 28, that's a young age to have both parents pass. So she has her own home now, but I mean, I'd imagine if she liked her parents at a hell of a cost. The issue is this. We went appliance shopping, her and the friend, because most of the stuff in the house was 10 to 15 years old in the house that she inherited. We were standing with an employee who I had asked to recommend some smaller items like toasters and kettles when the employee asked if I was moving out, just making general chit-chat. I told him I was moving, and he asked whether I had bought or rented, and I told him I bought because it was just easier and less awkward than telling him I inherited the house. He told me that was cool and began talking about the toasters again when my friend cut in and said that I had inherited the house, not purchased it. The employee went quiet, and I gave her a "what was that" face. I was taken aback, and she continued on saying, "Yeah, I purchased my house." If that was my friend, I would not be pleased. I asked, does it really matter? I'm here to buy some kitchen appliances, not tell this guy my personal issues. She grinned and said, it's just for the record. What record? What record does the man in the appliance store recommend that you would have to do that to someone who had their reasons for telling this sort of different version of the story, for obviously not wanting to say they inherited it, whatever, okay? And then having to put a finer point on it and saying, well, I bought my house, when actually, honey, you didn't. So she grinned and said, it's just for the record, which made me more confused and annoyed. You can probably see where this is going. I replied, oh, okay, then it's just for the record. Your parents purchased your house for you. The poor employee, can you imagine? This poor person's making minimum wage selling toasters and is thinking, I do not need this shit. Okay, the employee quickly retreated. The employee actually is an interesting player in this little drama. The employee quickly retreated, and then the friend walked outside the shop. I caught up with her, and she said I was a massive asshole for pointing out that she couldn't afford to own without her parents' help. This after this person forcing this friend, like sort of cornering them in front of someone else about inheriting the house and not purchasing it. I returned with a very similar, my parents, it's interesting, I returned with a very similar, so the person who wrote the letter said, my parents also helped me with getting a house too, just in a really terrible way. I am reading that as actually a way to try to maybe even a little apologize, just like, listen, I get that you needed help. I got my house through help, but in a very bad way. So it's not even like she kept lambasting the friend. She said like, okay, we both had help in weird ways, in my case, or sad ways. My partner agrees with me, saying that she's the one who opened that door. But our other friends are split almost 50-50. I don't agree. This one seems relatively clear to me. Edit, holy hell, this blew up. Sorry I wasn't clear with my friends being 50-50. Half think I'm not the asshole. Others think we're both assholes. Oh, okay. And I shouldn't have escalated the problem. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Like I said, there's a little subtlety here. Here's my guess on the dynamic. The friend whose parents purchased her the home, that there was likely some shame there. And that shame, in a way, it's almost as though She sees her friend, the one who wrote the letter, has her own home now, but got it through this really tragic way. But it's very possible the friend whose parents bought her the home might have thought that that was actually something you could talk about in a less sort of shamey way than my parents bought me a house. And the friend, the person who wrote the letter, said, listen, I think it's cool that her parents were able to do that for her. Like, more power to them. They had the money. It's tough for people to buy homes and on and on. She sadly did get her own home, but through this really bad path. Now, the person whose parents bought her the home is a better deal, assuming she likes her parents, and that's an assumption, but assuming she likes her parents get to come to this townhouse and enjoy it and be with her and spend time with her. The friend whose parents died, and that's how she got the house, she herself may be feeling a sense of grief. The letter writer may be feeling a sense of grief and not actually want to share that with that store employee at wherever the heck it was, or whatever appliance store they were at, and maybe even not make that employee feel uncomfortable. To just take the easier way out. We do this all the time, by the way. There's a story that's a lot more gruesome. People split up for some reason, or someone acquires a house for some reason, or switches jobs, and they don't say, well, the reason this happened is because my husband cheated on me, or something like that. They're not going to tell that to a stranger and say, oh, it didn't work out, but that's why we're doing this separately. It's often to protect that third party. So when this person, instead of saying, I inherited the house, because they're young, they're also not people in their 50s and 60s, right? 28 looks 28. So a young person is saying, I inherited the house. I suppose, yes, the employee might think grandparent, whatever, but we also don't know how soon this was, how much grief there still may have been. But for the friend, for her unprocessed shame to say, well, no, actually, you inherited it, but I bought mine. I mean, honey, if you're going to do the dozens like that, you might as well own your shit, right? You might as well own that your house was bought for you and your friend inherited it. If you're going to go all in and try to be sort of Little Miss Transparency, then be Little Miss Transparency. And if I don't even see the point of that you would have to say, no, toaster selling person, my friend inherited her house because her parents died and my parents bought me a house. To which this poor employee who's thinking, I should be getting combat pay at time and a half for working with these people, is now going to say, okay, I didn't need to all know all of this. Which toaster do you want, right? But this particular Am I the Asshole is interesting to me because it spoke to how there's many times these sort of unprocessed, shame-inducing experiences. Clearly the woman whose house was bought for her, like, just own your luck. There'll be something else in life where maybe the luck won't work out your way. Your friend didn't have really luck. They lost their parents prematurely, resulted in them having a house. But there's something so hurtful in trying to push that point because, again, the inheriting the house was associated with the loss of the parents. It doesn't really seem like a friendship, that somebody would sort of drop a dime on you as a way to sort of hide their own shame in front of somebody who doesn't care. I take umbrage at some of the commenters who are saying the letter writer, the person who called the friend out in front of the employee, was being an asshole for doing that. I think that also came out of hurt. And I'm even going to give the letter writer a little bit of credit because they're probably, again, going through a period of grief. And if they're just now furnishing this house or putting stuff in this house, the loss may have been within the last year. Again, 28, losing both parents, that's young. And so I think in that moment when you're so shocked that a friend of all people, and she said, I helped this person move and decorate and all of that, but to have your friend sort of feel the need to shame you in front of a store employee, unfortunately, or fortunately, it just simply is, a lot of us will lash out under those circumstances and just say, I can't believe you just did that. I guess the argument could have been made in an ideal world, the friend would have kept her mouth shut until they were outside of the store, not done it in front of the employee who was likely weirded out by the entire interaction. And when it was done, I guess that I would have given it a AAA if they could have done that. But then there's also this piece about this idea of all of us always having to be so damn over-controlled with all of these toxic people. Wait until the right moment and do it at the right moment. It's as though in order to coexist in a world with so many toxic people, we're having to learn how to be so over-controlled with our emotions at all times. It's actually not necessarily good for us. Having that kind of reaction of what the hell? It would be as though, I don't know, you were at a you were at a wedding dress buying store and you were buying a wedding dress, and the person who was with you to buy the wedding dress said, oh, the reason they met is because they cheated on each other and that's how they ended up together. Would you really want the wedding dress store people to know that? No. You know, it may not necessarily be the part of the story they're proud of. Maybe it ended up in a wedding, but the idea that the friend who said, no, you didn't buy that house, you inherited it, I gotta tell you, they kind of drew first blood. And this idea that the other person would have had to kind of keep it so under wraps until they were out in the street. I don't think that's, I think there's a point at which we're asking people to restrain their emotions in a way that doesn't sound like she was shouting at her. It just basically said, oh, well, that's interesting. If you're going to make it about purchasing a house, please note that your parents purchased your house. I mean, again, I empathize with it. I understand it wasn't like perfection to do that, but these are the struggles here. These are the issues that toxic people bring into our lives. And this is something that comes up over and over again in the survivors I talk with, who say to me, what I hate most about the toxic friendships, toxic relationships with my family is that it brings out the worst in me. And I think in this Am I the Asshole, this person actually does recognize it brought out the worst in this person, that they may not be the person who wanted to sort of put a lens on the fact that their friend had to get help to buy a house or had to have the house given to them. Wasn't initially said they were quite happy with them, didn't have an issue with it. It only became an issue when this person felt the need to sort of make a point in the store. But as I said, I think what drove that is a person's shame. But we do know people who have shame that is so unchecked that leads them to do impulsive things. That dynamic is actually a pretty big piece of narcissism. So I'm giving this person not the asshole, and I actually understand why they felt that they kind of had that moment where they just said what they said. In an ideal world, sure, that poor employee wouldn't have been pulled out of it. You know, what's probably the most interesting hour of their day. So those are my thoughts. But again, it gets at some of the nuances of shame, of how we show up in front of other people, of how do we respond when we feel betrayed in a moment in such a low-stakes situation, an employee at an appliance store. But yet, sometimes those low-stakes situations that somebody would betray us in that place can feel far, far worse than in higher-stakes situations where there is more emotion involved. So them's my thoughts. Thanks again.